Back when I was 20, during the summer before my senior year of college, I landed an internship at a financial services firm downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, mostly data entry, spreadsheets, and sitting in front of a computer all day. But it paid decently, and it looked great on a resume. There were 7 other interns behind me, and we were all crammed together in this open office section with rows of cubicles that didn't quite give you privacy, just enough to make small talk feel optional. Out of the 7, 5 of them were people I liked, a mix of chill, down-to-earth college students who didn't take the internship too seriously. Another guy, Eric, was the type who treated the whole thing like it was life or death, barely spoke, and was always typing like his keyboard owed him money. But the 7th intern, Alex, was something else entirely. When I first met Alex, he seemed normal enough, maybe a little awkward, but we all were at the beginning. He was tall, thin, kind of pale, and had this mop of dark hair that always looked a little unwashed. He didn't really fit the finance intern stereotype. But that's not what threw me off. It was the way he acted around me. At first, it was subtle. He'd pop up at my cubicle during the day, lean over the divider in a way that made him look freakishly tall, like 7 feet tall because the cubicle walls were low, and only his head would be visible above it. He'd tilt his head slightly, grin with this strange, frozen smile, and start talking in this deliberately weird voice, like he was trying to sound creepy on purpose. I'd laugh it off awkwardly, pretending I thought it was funny, but I remember thinking it was an odd thing to do in a professional setting. He'd say random stuff like working hard, or hardly working Ronnie in that slow, unnatural tone, and then hold the smile for way too long. The first couple of times I figured he was just being quirky or trying too hard to stand out. Some people at internships are awkward like that, so I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But then it started happening more often. Every single day, at least once, I'd see his head slowly rise above my cubicle wall. That same stretched grin plastered across his annoying face, and he'd start some bizarre conversation that didn't make sense. Sometimes he'd make jokes that weren't funny, or mutter random phrases that didn't relate to anything. And every time he used that same unsettling voice, like a soft voice, in a kind of taunting way. Honestly, a very good recent comparison of the voice he was doing was the voice Charlie Hunnam did for his role as Ed Gein. The other interns noticed it too, but they mostly laughed it off, thinking Alex was being weird on purpose to lighten the mood. I also think they thought Alex and I had built some kind of rapport that the rest of them didn't build with him. There was something about the way he directed it, only at me, that made me feel uncomfortable. It's not like I treated him any differently. It was like I was his personal audience for whatever creepy act he was trying to pull. As the weeks went on, his visits got longer. He'd lean over and stay there for minutes at a time, staring at me while talking, sometimes not even saying much, just looking. I'd fake a laugh, say I had to finish a report, and hope he'd get the hint. He rarely did. Then one night, about 6 weeks into the internship, I was home eating dinner when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I normally don't answer unknown calls, but since I was expecting a delivery confirmation, I picked it up. When I said hello, all I heard for a few seconds was silence. Then suddenly, I heard the voice I recognized immediately. It was Alec's voice, the same forced, creepy tone he always used in the office. He said, "The tide's coming in. Pull your boat out of the water." But this time, His voice was a little louder, almost a yell. He dragged the words out like he was reciting a riddle, and then he burst out laughing this insanely unhinged laugh before hanging up. The thing that made my skin crawl wasn't just the call. It was the fact that I never gave Alex my number, not once. The next thing I did was text the number back, asking if this was Alex. But the text said not delivered, and when I looked it up, it was a landline number. That's when I really started to get freaked out. How did he get my number? Why was he calling me like that? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he found it through a company contact sheet or something. But even then, the way he said that line didn't sit with me. I couldn't stop replaying the sound of his laugh in my head. It didn't sound like someone joking around. It sounded like he was with me to the point of trying to actually scare me. This wasn't just goofy behavior anymore. That Monday when I got to the office, Alex wasn't there. His desk was empty and I didn't see him all morning. I went to our supervisor, a guy named Martin, and I asked him if Alex might have gotten my number through the company. And Martin was very confused, saying interns didn't have access to employee info like that. On top of that, they'd let Alex go at the end of the previous week because he wasn't doing any work and had ignored multiple warnings. That's when I told him about the call. He seemed surprised, and some of the other interns overheard. A couple of them started nodding and saying they always thought Alex was creepy, that he'd made them uncomfortable too. I told them about the weird cubicle visits, the voice, everything. Martin said not to worry, that Alex was gone for good and had no reason to come back. So that was a little comforting. For the next week or so, I kept expecting something else to happen. A message, a random encounter, something. But nothing came. Life at the office went back to normal. I figured maybe that was really the end of it until one early morning. It was a Friday around 5 a.m. Still dark outside except for a thin gray light creeping in through the blinds. I woke up because I thought I'd heard something. Maybe a noise from outside. It made me get up and look out my window. I wish I hadn't. Standing in my backyard, halfway between the trees and the porch light, was a figure looking up at my window, even though it was barely light out. I could tell who it was immediately. The thin frame and the messy hair, the way he stood perfectly straight. It was Alex. For a few seconds, I could not move. I just stared at him, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then, clear as day, I heard him call out my name in that same creepy, performative voice he'd always used at work. He dragged it out long and sing-gongy. I grabbed my phone, about to call 911, when I saw him tilt his head back and start laughing. That same loud, hysterical laughter, like he did on the phone before hanging up. It didn't sound right. It sounded like someone completely detached from reality. I shouted through the window, yelling at him that I was calling the police and to get the hell off my property. I also waved my phone out the window. He just stood there for a second longer, then turned and started walking away, still laughing as he disappeared into the trees behind my house. I called the police, and in short, the dispatcher asked me if he was still there. When I said no, she told me to call back if he came back or threatened to break in. I never saw him again after that. Not at work, not around town, nowhere. The police couldn't do much since he hadn't technically broken in or made a direct threat. It was one of those situations where you just have to live with the unease, hoping it's over. The rest of the summer passed without incident. I finished the internship, and on the last day, my boss pulled me aside to offer me a permanent position for after graduation. At the time, I accepted. Though a small part of me felt unsettled about ever going back to that office again. I never told them about what had happened that morning. I didn't see the point. Alex was gone, and no one even knew where he'd ended up. Over time, I convinced myself that he must have been dealing with some kind of mental illness or social disorder, something that made him act that way. It's the only way I can make sense of how he went from a quiet, awkward intern to standing in my backyard at 5 o'clock in the morning laughing like a lunatic. It's been a few years now and I've moved on from it. I didn't end up with that company. I got a different job after graduation. I don't think about this too often anymore. But sometimes the thought of that image of him in my backyard still skeeves me out. I still wonder how he got my number, how he found my address, and what he wanted that morning. I guess it's not that hard to get people's info online these days. All I know is that for a few months in my life, I worked alongside someone who wasn't just strange. He had something way deeper going on. And no matter how many years pass, I'll never forget the sound of him laughing in the dark, as if it was all one big joke that only he understood. This was our first story. Now let's move to our second story. I was 17 when this all happened. It was my first real job, working at a local grocery store in our quiet Vermont town. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else and where nothing ever really happened. I liked the job at first. It was simple and most of my coworkers were friendly. I quickly fell into a rhythm with the cashiers and some of the stock workers, especially during the slow hours when there weren't many customers. When that happened, we'd all gather near the front of the store, just chatting about random stuff like what we watched on TV, making fun of the older, quirkier employees and complaining about customers, that sort of thing. It was one of the few times during my shifts where I felt like I wasn't just standing behind a register, staring at a screen or a blank wall all day. Depending on who was the shift supervisor for the day, it would either be relaxed or more strict. Like if a younger supervisor was working, it would be more chill. People would be on their phones and people would socialize by the front. There was one coworker who I didn't know well at first, a guy named Sean. He was 24, a little awkward. The kind of guy who always seemed like he didn't quite know how to read social cues. He had longer hair, but kind of in the awkward in-between phase, like he was growing it out, but didn't quite reach his shoulders yet. He worked in the dairy section, so we didn't interact much at work. He was quiet and polite enough, and I honestly didn't think much of him. Most people just nodded at him when they walked past, and he did the same. But eventually, I was added to a co-worker group chat, and he was in it. I didn't think twice about it. It was just a chat for work stuff and dumb jokes, and it seems most of the younger employees were in there. But then, Sean started messaging me directly. At first, it was harmless. He asked about my shifts, whether I was covering certain days, things like that. But over the next few weeks, it became clear he was trying to get closer. He started asking questions about my personal life, like what I liked, what I do after work, even little things like what I did over the weekend. Again, I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, people make small talk, right? But the tone was off. Sometimes he'd call me cute in ways that made me uncomfortable. Sometimes he'd make jokes that were slightly flirty. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he just didn't know how to behave with girls my age. That's another thing. I was only 17. He was decently older than me, and I don't think anyone else knew he was flirting with me like that. It didn't take long before the behavior became slightly annoying. He'd comment on things I posted online, and sometimes the messages were late at night. Not threatening, not really. But there was this persistence in him that made me uneasy. I didn't know how to tell him to back off without making it awkward at work. So, I mostly ignored him. "Don't where you eat," I always hear people say. One day, I was at home watching Stranger Things, my favorite show still to this day. I'd been catching up on the latest season, binge watching episodes in my bedroom, just completely lost in the show. And then a couple days later at work, everyone was gathered at the front of the store, chatting about TV shows. I was talking with a few of the cashiers about some random series when Sean suddenly asked me, "You like Stranger Things, right?" I froze. I couldn't remember telling anyone at work about my show. I just nodded, trying to brush it off, but it left this cold feeling in my stomach. How did he know? I didn't say anything. I did make eye contact for a moment. He just smiled awkwardly and eventually left the front of the store back to the dairy section like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me more than I had realized. It wasn't until a few nights later that the fear really started. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep after a long day at work. The house was quiet, and then I heard a soft scraping noise against my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe a branch brushing against the glass. But then I heard it again, a distinct sound of someone tapping on the window, just lightly enough for it to be unnerving. I got up and peeked through the blinds, half expecting to see Sean out there. But there was nothing. I tried to convince myself the sound was nothing to be alarmed about. But the thought of Sean's question at work about Stranger Things, a show I hadn't told anyone about, it kept running through my head. A couple of days later, he texted me again. This time, I didn't ignore it. I told him clearly and firmly that I wasn't interested. That was when things escalated. Almost immediately, he replied, "Okay, good luck changing your address." I couldn't believe it. In one insane text that he clearly sent before thinking of the repercussions, he proved my suspicions right. I saved the messages and took screenshots. I went straight to my manager and explained everything. My manager was shocked. He told me not to worry, that they'd handle it. I also went with my dad to the local police department to file a report, showing them the messages and explaining the incident with the window, explaining that I suspected Sean might be stalking me. The next day at work, Sean was called in by our boss. He didn't come back. It turned out he was fired on the spot, and the police started the paperwork for a restraining order. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But I quickly realized that nothing really felt over. Even with the restraining order in place, if he was actually a crazy person, what's a piece of paper going to do to stop him from coming back to the house and doing something crazy? I double-checked locks obsessively, refused to answer any calls or messages from unknown numbers, and avoided talking about my routines with anyone except family. The weeks dragged on like that. I would wake up at night convinced I heard something outside. I had to remind myself constantly that the restraining order was legally binding, that he couldn't come near me. But the fear was real. Eventually, as the weeks turned into months, the paranoia started to fade. There were no incidents, no attempts to contact me, no sudden appearances. The restraining order seemed to hold, and life slowly returned to normal. I got more comfortable going out alone, stopped checking my window obsessively before bed, and eventually I stopped thinking about Sean altogether. It took a long time, though, for me to feel fully safe again. Even after moving on, the experience left a mark. I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, cautious about new people I met, especially in situations where I felt isolated. I learned to trust my instincts and take any uncomfortable behavior seriously, no matter how small it seemed at first. Looking back, the thing that scares me most isn't that Sean might have actually harmed me. It's how quickly someone who seems normal, even awkward or harmless, can turn into a source of fear. It can start with small, seemingly innocent interactions, messages, questions, little comments, and escalate into something far more serious. Now, years later, I've moved past it. I work in a different town, live in a new apartment, and I don't think about that grocery store anymore. I don't talk to a single coworker from that job anymore. But the memory of those nights lying in bed convinced someone was outside my window. It's not something that ever goes away entirely. It's a reminder of how quickly life can feel unsafe, even in a small, quiet town where nothing ever seems to happen. And while Sean never came close to doing anything physically, the psychological impact was enough to make me question how safe I ever truly was. So, if you're ever at work and notice a coworker crossing a line, even subtly, take it seriously. Don't brush it off as awkwardness or harmless flirting. It might seem over the top at first, but it could save you from months of fear or worse, because sometimes the danger isn't obvious. But eventually, I did move on, and now years later, I can look back and say, I survived. And that's enough. Let's move to our third story. When I was 26, I started working at a small insurance office in a quiet part of Pennsylvania. The kind of office that's tucked behind a strip mall with one long row of desks, flickering fluorescent lights, and the smell of coffee at all hours of the day. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I liked most of the people there. The job could get boring, especially on slow days when the phones barely rang, but it was easy money. I usually worked the day shift, but on this particular Friday, I was scheduled to help close up the office because we were behind on filing a batch of client records. There was a big storm warning that afternoon, the kind that takes over the entire local news broadcast. The moment I woke up and looked out the window that morning, I knew it was going to be a dark, stormy day. And around 3 o'clock, the rain started to pour so heavily you couldn't see the end of the street. The thunder came soon after, shaking the windows every few minutes. Honestly, I was personally enjoying the ambiance of the storm. Then the manager decided to let most of the employees leave early before it got worse. But a couple of us volunteered to stay to finish some paperwork. The only other person who stayed was a guy named Tom, who had just started working there about 2 weeks prior. He was in his early 30s, tall, quiet, and sort of off-putting in a way I couldn't describe. I wouldn't say creepy, just strange. He never said much to anyone, but he was always nearby. If I went to make coffee, he'd be there 2 minutes later. If I was restocking paper, he'd show up pretending to do the same thing. I figured he was just socially awkward. When 5 o'clock hit, the storm was in full force. I swear, every few seconds, lightning flashed, followed by thunder that made the floor vibrate. The office felt emptier than usual, and the usual hum of lights was replaced by the sound of the storm. Tom was sitting at his desk a few rows down, typing something on his computer that looked like nonsense from where I sat. Every time I looked up, I could see him glancing over in my direction. At first, I tried to focus on my work, but after an hour or so, I realized I hadn't seen him get up once. Around 6:30, the power started flickering. Both of us made the same nervous laugh when the lights dimmed, but he didn't say anything. The next flicker lasted longer, and when the power finally went out completely, the office went silent, except for the rain. The emergency lights kicked in, leaving everything bathed in a faint orange glow. I said something about maybe it being a good time to head out, but Tom didn't respond. I heard the sound of keys jingling and then the front door locking. He muttered something about how it wasn't safe to go outside right now. I thought maybe he was just trying to be helpful, but something about the way he said it gave me chills. I went to grab my bag and jacket, figuring I'd wait it out for a few minutes before heading home. The power outage made the whole building feel smaller. The emergency lights barely lit the hallways, and the storm outside was deafening. When I came back toward the front, Muick Tom was standing near the door, just staring out into the dark parking lot. The rain was falling so heavily, you couldn't see anything past the glass. I told him I was going to make a quick call to my boyfriend to let him know I'd be home soon. He didn't say anything again. He stood there staring out the window. I walked toward the break room, but when I tried using my phone, there was no signal. I figured the storm must have knocked out the tower. I tried the landline, but the line was dead too. I turned around to go back to the main office and nearly jumped when I saw Tom standing in the doorway. I hadn't even heard him walk up. He was holding a small flashlight under his chin, casting shadows up his face. He had this half smile like he thought it was funny. I forced a nervous laugh and told him he scared me. I then asked him again about unlocking the door so I could leave, but he said something about it not being safe yet, and how it was better to wait until the worst of the storm passed. I said fine, but inside I was starting to feel nervous. He kept watching me. I decided to move to my cubicle to pack up my stuff, pretending to be calm. I wanted to wait for a lull in the storm and then get out. When I looked up again a few minutes later, Tom was gone. I figured maybe he went to the restroom. I took the chance to head to the back door instead of the front one. I knew that one led to a small parking lot behind the building where my car was. When I reached it, I realized the handle wouldn't move. The door was chained shut from the inside, like someone had looped a chain and padlock around it. We had never done that before. I turned around and saw the faint glow of the flashlight coming from down the hallway. I ducked into the supply closet next to the break room and closed the door quietly, trying to keep my breathing under control. I could hear Tom walking slowly through the hall, and then I heard him call my name. He sounded like he was trying to sound comforting. He said he just wanted to make sure I was safe. I didn't move or say a word. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could probably hear it. He walked past the closet, and for a few seconds I could see the thin strip of light from the flashlight shining under the door. Then it disappeared. A loud crack of thunder made the building shake. The sound of rain got even louder for a second, and I realized part of the roof above the break room must have been leaking. I waited. I'd estimate 10 minutes before I finally worked up the nerve to open the door a little. The hall was empty. The flashlight beam was gone. I stepped out carefully and made my way toward the front again. When I turned the corner, I froze. The front glass door had been shattered completely. Rain was blowing inside across the floor, soaking the carpet. Tom was nowhere in sight. I hesitated, wondering if he had gone outside, but then I realized this was my only chance. I ran out the door into the pouring rain and sprinted for my car. I didn't even care that I was getting drenched. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I sped out of the parking lot without looking back once. When I finally got home, I locked every door and sat in my living room shaking, watching the rain pour against my windows. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the office and told my manager what had happened. He didn't believe me at first, until he got there himself and saw the broken glass. He called the police, who showed up and took a statement from me when I was at the office. They said they'd look into it, but it sounded like Tom had just taken off. His car was still in the lot, unlocked with the keys sitting on the driver's seat. His phone, wallet, and a few personal items were still inside. The security cameras had been turned off manually before the power outage, which meant he must have done it earlier in the night. Nobody ever saw him again. A few of my coworkers said maybe he had some kind of breakdown, but I couldn't stop wondering if he'd been planning something worse. I quit the job a month later. Even though nothing ever happened after that, I couldn't work in a small enclosed place like that, where I had experienced such a traumatic incident. It just wasn't healthy.